Hello, and welcome to the 2021 State of American Business. I'm Tracy Tappaney, co-president of Wyoming Machine, a metal fabrication business based out of Stacy, Minnesota. For more than 20 years, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has hosted this signature event to take stock of where business stands and to outline the agenda for the coming year. In normal times, we would be gathered in the historic chamber headquarters in Washington, D.C., but these are not normal times. Instead, just like the businesses it represents, the chamber has adapted, and it has turned a new challenge into a historic opportunity. So for the first time ever, this event is being held completely virtually. As a result, joining us from far and wide are thousands of business advocates tuning in from all across our 50 states and 120 countries. I want to welcome each and every one of you and thank you for taking time to be with us today. This afternoon, you'll hear Chamber CEO Tom Donahue's business outlook for the year. Then there will be a discussion bringing together economic experts and lawmakers to discuss the recovery and governing through crisis. We'll then have a discussion on business's role in our democracy, an issue of vital importance in our nation right now. And we'll close today's program with a long-term discussion on innovating and adapting for the future with CEOs of some of the nation's leading businesses. At noon Eastern throughout the rest of the week, you'll have the opportunity to join Policy Power Hours that will explore more deeply the topics we'll begin to unpack today. If you haven't engaged with the Chamber before, you're in for tremendous insights about the opportunities and challenges facing the business community and news you can use to inform your business strategy and planning for the year ahead. In 2020, every business had a unique story, but nearly all were defined by a common theme: resilience. As a manufacturer of critical ventilator component, when the country first locked down, our operations sped up. We typically produce about 5,000 ventilator parts per year. In 2020, on the shop floor where I stand today, our employees made and distributed 60,000 parts by April. We were able to be there when our country needed us because the U.S. Chamber was there when we needed them. Through the Chamber's Small Business Policy Council meetings and its numerous COVID-19 resources, we stayed up to date with the information and guidance we needed to keep our employees safe and our operations running. I am proud of what my organization and the entire business community has accomplished this past year, and I'm honored to introduce someone who has been critical to helping us do it. Tom Donahue is the CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a position he has held for more than 20 years. Throughout his tenure, he's been a champion for free enterprise, fighting in Washington for businesses small and large. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Tom Donahue.
Thank you, Tracy, and welcome to all of you joining us from across this great nation and all around the world. Let me start by wishing each of you a happy, healthy, and hopeful new year. We come together today optimistic, that's right, optimistic, for the year and for the future, because the state of American business is resilient. In the face of significant challenges, including a global pandemic and an economic crisis, businesses have adapted to survive. They have served their communities and this country, and they have put forward life-saving, world-changing solutions. Our nation has seen it in the determination of small businesses who have kept their doors open and kept their employees on payrolls against all odds. We've seen it in the tireless dedication of the essential workers who have kept daily life running for all of us. And we've seen it in the precedent-shattering global innovation leading to the development of safe and effective vaccines faster than anyone dreamed. And there's no question, business could not have persevered through the challenges of the past year without the leadership and the partnership of our government. As the Chamber marshaled all of its resources and worked closely with state and local chamber partners to help businesses make it through an unprecedented economic shutdown, members of Congress worked together to pass 4 significant packages, including the most sweeping federal aid in U.S. history. Amidst all of this, we also worked with our leaders to advance other critical priorities, such as a new trade deal with Canada and Mexico, badly needed new rules to rebalance corporate governance and help reverse the decline in public companies, and the largest energy package in more than a decade. That package includes 40 new pieces of legislation that together will leverage private-public innovation and help protect the environment. The Chamber was proud to support it. As we turn the page to 2021, we are focused on reigniting our economy and reasserting our leadership and competitiveness. That too will hinge on the resiliency of business and the partnership with government. It will take the collective strength of the thousands of members of the business community gathered for this event and the millions of others who help power our economy. Together we can help lead our country out of the crisis and into a brighter future. It will take thoughtful action by our leaders, prioritizing the right policies at the right time. It will take prudence to avoid sweeping or unavoidable proposals, unworkable proposals that would hold back our economic recovery. And it will take the courage and collaboration needed to govern with the country's interests and our collective future at heart. Some may look back at the events of the last week and ask is that possible? Let me say unequivocally, violence has no place in our democracy, no matter where it comes from, who perpetrates it, or what motivates it. But our democracy is strong. Our commitment to the rule of law is unwavering, and our government is resilient. After the Capitol was breached and our brave law enforcement officers protected lawmakers and their staffs and restored order, our senators and our representatives promptly went back to work that night. Working into the early hours, they finished their job, confirming the clear and lawful election of President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President Harris. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got work to do, and we're going to keep at it without distraction or deterrence. It begins with the recovery. Depending on where you sit, the recovery may be going fine, even well. Some industries and businesses and segments of our workforce have thrived. We see the evidence in a surging stock market, record profits, robust consumer spending on goods, a housing boom, and rising personal savings rates. Smart and aggressive action by the Federal Reserve has placed a significant role in more positive aspects of the recovery. But it's very different, a very different story for those who have been negatively affected by the pandemic. Entire industries have been decimated because people aren't traveling. They're not gathering. They're not shopping. They're not going out like they used to. Small businesses, particularly minority-owned, women-owned, and family-owned businesses, have been disproportionately impacted, many of them forced to shutter. 10 million people who had jobs last January don't have jobs today. We won't restore the jobs, growth, and prosperity that were lost in 2020 until we eradicate this pandemic and get our economy firing on all cylinders. And for that to happen, our elected officials must pull all the right policy levers and push back against misguided proposals in the year 2021. Most critically, we must continue to work with the new Congress and the Biden administration to help industries, businesses, and workers make it through to the end of this crisis. The pandemic is far from over, but if Congress sufficiently supports the economy with the relief it needs, we could see growth rebound by the third quarter of this year. This must include all the support necessary to get those vaccines widely distributed and administered. Only then can we truly move past the pandemic and begin to shrink the extraordinary expenditures that have been necessary to keep our system afloat. We can also stimulate the economy in a major way if we finally do the long overdue and broadly supported work of rebuilding our infrastructure. It is the number one way to raise productivity, to create jobs and drive up incomes in a hurry. Our lawmakers should enact a fiscally and environmentally responsive and responsible infrastructure package that focuses on urgent needs like roads, bridges, modernizes our critical networks, and upgrades and expands technology like broadband. You know, even in a 50-50 Senate and a House divided by only 5 votes, this can get done. And it might build some goodwill for bipartisan progress on other priorities. We've been working on this for more than 20 years. Let's just get together, find a way to pay for it, and let's get moving. This year, there can be no excuse for failure. To make infrastructure investments successful, we not only need money, we need people. And that goes for our entire economy. For the many Americans who are out of work, we must prioritize finding them jobs through inclusive growth and, when needed, retraining. Our lawmakers should fund rapid training programs to connect the unemployed with jobs in new sectors. Employer-led initiatives should be prioritized to ensure that training is aligned with industry needs in demand skills. Some of the best paying sectors, such as healthcare, financial and professional services, have more job openings than available workers. If we do this is the right thing to do, and we do it quickly, will improve the living standards for millions of Americans and get our economy growing even faster. At the same time, we need to tackle head-on systemic inequalities in education, employment, entrepreneurship, and the criminal justice system. Through our Equality of Opportunity initiative, we are advocating for reform in Washington and working with chamber partners to address these issues in communities all across the country. We also have to confront the reality that we have people without jobs and massive numbers of jobs without people. Even if we successfully employed every American willing and able to work, we would still face significant labor shortages in construction, agriculture, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, and technology. We fought vigorously and successfully against actions by the Trump administration to severely limit legal immigration. And we will work cooperatively with the Biden administration to reform our immigration system to meet the needs of a modern economy. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Allowing the world's most talented and industrious people to contribute to our economy drives growth, which in turn creates more jobs for Americans. This urgent priority should draw bipartisan support. Building consensus on the immigration reform, workforce development, and infrastructure investment this year will help accelerate a widespread recovery and deliver economic relief to the businesses and the workers whose resilience has been put to the test. At the same time, we must champion longer-term priorities to rebuild and expand our economy and protect our national security for the future. As a new government prepares to take the reins, we must prevent a return to excessive regulation or anti-competitive taxes. Remember, before the economic shock of the pandemic, the U.S. economy was very healthy, very strong, thanks in no small part to pro-business policies and regulatory relief that unlocked growth. Now is exactly the wrong time to further test the resiliency of businesses by hiking taxes or heaping on new regulations that do more harm than good. Business creation during the pandemic has been booming, with new business startups 50% more than last year. We must not hamper this surge in activity with overregulation. Moreover, the recent and dramatic acceleration in technology and how we use it will usher in a post-pandemic digital age with limitless economic opportunity. As regulators rush to keep up with these advances, they must take a light touch and a smart approach to preserve the innovation and the growth being driven by the tech sector. Now, the Chamber will use every tool in our disposal, including the courts, to protect our recovery, our competitiveness, and our economic future from regulatory overreach at home and abroad that could undermine it all. Our economic future is also tied to our global engagement. In recent years, our resilience has been tested through trade wars and tariffs. However, for America to remain competitive and expand our potential for sustainable growth and prosperity, we must re-engage with the world through a bold trade agenda. Yes, let's make more products in America, but let's also sell them to the rest of the world. We must extend our reach to the 95% of the world's customers who live beyond our borders. We must catch up to the countries that are inking new trade deals left and right. And we must lift the tariffs that have hurt American manufacturers and farmers and have been paid for by American companies and their customers. We need to revitalize our alliances, to reaffirm America's leadership in multinational organizations like the WTO and the WHO, and restore our credibility on the global stage. At the same time, we all know that China is the biggest global challenge that our nation faces. We must work to stabilize the relationship through strength and cooperation. On one hand, China is by far the largest, fastest growing market for U.S. companies. for the good of our own economy and the world's. We have to seize these opportunities. But at the same time, we have to confront the unfair trade and industrial policies that China uses against U.S. companies and others. We must work with our allies to stand up to China while also pursuing new negotiations with Beijing to protect our intellectual property. It's right that our government wants to address unfair trade practices. We will be partners in working to level the playing field, not only in China, but in other key markets such as India and Brazil. Finally, we cannot rebuild a strong and competitive economy without robust national security and sustainable and safe supply chains. In our interconnected world, protecting our physical and digital assets is essential to keeping commerce and information flowing freely, efficiently, and securely. That must include cybersecurity. The recent widespread breach of the networks of U.S. agencies and companies by foreign actors was pervasive and sophisticated, and it has the potential to pose a far more sinister threat to our economy and our critical infrastructure. The Chamber will continue to push for intelligence sharing between the public and the private sector to identify, to mitigate these threats at home and abroad. Now, I've only scratched the surface on the major issues we'll be focusing on this year. Government partnership at every level is going to be key to achieving any of these objectives I've touched on today. The decisions of our leaders and lawmakers will determine the strength and the trajectory of our economy. And that is why we advocate for the right policies, fight vigorously against the wrong ones, and work constructively to achieve the best results for the businesses that are driving the recovery and that will lead us into the future. That is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's stock in trade. It's true that home and abroad, we are operating at a time when people don't always have a lot of faith in institutions. They have mistrust in government, questions about the credibility of our democratic systems, contempt in some places for capitalism. For different reasons, these factors have helped drive a rising support for nationalism or socialism and other divisions. Well, to that I say, no one has ever bet against America and won. We have it within us to make this a pivotal point in our history. We will work with unlikely allies, and we will build new coalitions. We will be willing to find common ground. We will push our leaders to do the right thing and have their backs when they do the hard things. We will have the courage to take responsible stands on tough issues and the fortitude to see them through. And we will have the vision to evolve when it's necessary and the wisdom to stand our ground when we must. If the American business community has the guts and the perseverance to do these things, and we will, then our partners in government and our allies around the world will have the ability and the willingness to work with us. And working together, we can recover and rebuild. We can reform what's broken. We can reaffirm our leadership. And we can renew the American promise of equal opportunity for all. I fundamentally believe that our nation will pull together, will pull through, and will emerge stronger. How am I so sure? Because of all of you, the entrepreneurs, the employers, and the workers, the business builders, the leaders, and the associations all across this great country. And they're going to do it. And the Chamber of Commerce of the United States is here to help. A resilient business community drives opportunity, prosperity, and security, and advancement. Your work fuels the most dramatic economy in history. You adapt, you invest, you invent, and you innovate for a better future. You find solutions and you make deals. And together, we sustain the system built for all of us, by all of us, for the benefit of all of us. Free enterprise. So I'm asking all of you to join us today. Let's unite around a mission of helping our nation forward. Let's make common cause of growth and opportunity. Let's rally for our recovery and for our future. Thank you very much. Now let's just go do it.
Stay-at-home orders have turned America's densest and most vibrant cities into virtual ghost towns.
More than 84 million Americans are now under state directive.
If you look at the map across the country, no corner of the nation is untouched.
More than 23,000 stores in the U.S. are
a shortage
closed.
of personal protective equipment. The masks, gowns, and gloves health workers need to stay safe while helping patients was so bad in the spring.
Well, thank you, Tom. You know, looking at that video, I'm reminded that 2020 and now the beginning of 2021 are unfolding in ways that none of us would have predicted a year ago. A global pandemic, the economic recession and dislocation that pandemic induced, and now near historic divisions in our own country. You know, we know that the solutions to the pandemic, to economic growth, and even to the divisions that we see in our nation are going to come from business, civil society, and government all working together. As Tom said, we have a lot of work to do, and there's no time like now to get started. That's why I'm so excited to welcome a panel to kick us off in our discussion about how we can restore the economy and how Congress on a bipartisan basis can help us address some of these challenges. Joining me today is the Senior Vice President and Chief Economist at ADP, Neela Richardson, as well as Representative John Katko, Republican of New York, and Representative Abigail Spanberger, Democrat of Virginia. Today, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what's happened in the past year, but also, perhaps more importantly, what we can look forward to and what government and business can do together. But to set the stage, let's understand where we're at today. So, Neela, I want to start with you. Where's the economy today? We hear about this K-shaped recovery, that some sectors are doing well, that others are continuing to suffer. You have a perfect vantage point looking at economic data every day, including those monthly employment reports. What are you seeing?
Well, Neil, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you and the congressman today. I think to understand today's economy, it's important to look back to January 2020. I know it seems like a long time ago, but it's worth knowing that we were in the longest U.S. expansion in history. And it wasn't a perfect economy, but there was some good things going for it, mainly very low unemployment rate, 3.5%, a 50-year low, and pretty solid consumer balance sheets. And that's actually helped set the stage for the recovery. But it wasn't perfect. Wages were far too soft. Business investment was lackluster, and there was a lot of corporate and fiscal debt. So that brings us to March and the pandemic. And what we saw was one of the greatest downturns in the economy since the Great Depression that was followed by a pretty swift recovery. As we sit here now, the economy is about 2/3 of the way back to the pre-pandemic levels. And the jobs market is about halfway there. But what that also means is that of the 22 million million US workers who lost their jobs during the pandemic, 10 million people who were employed in February are still not employed today. That's an astounding number. It also means that there are some people who have been hit harder by this pandemic than others. And that's why we're talking about this idea of a K-shaped recovery. In every recession, certain groups benefit or hurt more than others. But we haven't seen the extreme disparities that we've seen in this particular recession. And that's really because of two reasons. One, asset prices over the course of 2020 actually skyrocketed. They've gone really fast. Wall Street recovered very quickly after an initial blip in March. So you see house prices and equity prices increasing over 2020. The fact of the matter is the rich got richer in 2020 because they held on to these assets in the presence of very low interest rates, rock bottom, near zero rates. On the other hand, we know through looking at the data that it is those low income workers that were hit hardest, particularly in leisure and hospitality, in the sectors where social engagement is really important. In fact, ADP data shows that of those people making less than $15 an hour, they saw a job loss of 35%. And finally, I'll say for small businesses, they were in a position where they had to cut their headcount faster than larger firms. So that brings us to last month, the last December's job report, where we saw for the first time since April, the economy actually shed jobs. And that is because as much as we want to look forward to that light up at the end of the tunnel, which is the vaccine, we're still very much in the presence of a health crisis. The economy shed 140,000 jobs, according to the BLS. And that was because a lot of the improvements in terms of reopening the economy had to step back in the presence of this ongoing pandemic. So looking forward, we expect some challenging months ahead until we can get the pandemic under control, especially on Main Street for workers in hard-hit communities and industries. But there is light, as I said, at the end of this tunnel. We have a financial system that is willing and able to make use of low-cost funding to help restart these businesses, and a vaccine that hopefully will be distributed widely and as soon as possible, which should help unleash some of the pent-up demand that will aid the economic recovery. So in the short term, some near-term pain ahead, but longer term, there is optimism for a better future.
Well, Neil, I like that optimism. And, we know that one of the reasons to be optimistic is because we've at least seen Congress come together a couple times in the past year to help provide the support that the economy needs. And we're fortunate to be joined by two of the leaders who helped make that happen. But before turning to them, I want to give you a chance to say what you'd like to see from policymakers in Washington. Do you have any recommendations that they should consider as we think about how to support the economy and reach the goals that you just outlined.
Neil, you have given me a rare opportunity. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of the recovery we've seen so far has been because of that bipartisan stimulus. The CARES package passed in March, followed by the long-awaited for but very well welcomed $900 billion that was recently passed. What I'd like to see is a focus on those communities that have been hit hardest by the pandemic. Again, the disproportionate impact for low-income workers, for women who have borne the burden of the COVID economy in terms of schooling and caring, for people of color, particularly African Americans, who have felt both the health crisis and the job crisis. And finally, for those small businesses, because what we're seeing in the jobs market is not just workers who have disappeared in December, and those gains that have disappeared. Again, 10 million people still out of work. But small businesses have had to close their doors or operate at reduced capacity. And we know, as members of this great organization, that it is really small businesses that push the economy forward and create that dynamism that leads to economic growth. So I'd like to see more targeted attention to workers, small businesses, and hard-hit communities after we've solved the danger of the pandemic.
All right, well, let's turn to Representative Katko and Representative Spamberger. I mentioned both of your all's leadership in helping us get those two packages that Neela just talked about through Congress. So thank you for that. But I would also be remiss if I didn't say thank you on behalf of the Chamber for the leadership that both of you have shown individually over the last several weeks in a very difficult time in our nation. And we're incredibly appreciative of what both of you do and proud to be associated with you. I also happen to know that both of you are really in touch with your districts, small businesses, employers. And so maybe starting with Representative Spamberger, you can tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the greater Richmond area there in Virginia.
So I represent a district, as you mentioned, in the greater Richmond area. It's a central Virginia district. Majority of the population is in the suburbs, but the majority of our district landmass-wise is rural and agricultural. So the challenges that we are facing in Central Virginia are not unlike the challenges that people are facing across the country. It's a loss of jobs. It's a challenge, particularly to our restaurant owners. We are a vibrant region for family-owned small restaurants. And so they, of course, have been particularly hard hit initially by closures, but at this point by continued lack of consumer confidence or concern. So I've heard a lot from restaurant owners about the challenges that they continue to face, which is one of the reasons why I had been a supporter of the Restaurant Act, really recognizing that there's a real targeted need. Another challenge that's been facing our community significantly relates to school children and the return to school and school closures. Throughout our rural communities, we have significant challenges with broadband connectivity. And that has, of course, impacted the school district's ability to make choices about whether students can go back hybrid, sometime virtual, sometime in the classroom. And it, of course, creates significant disparity for the children who do not have access to broadband connectivity at home. From a business perspective, of course, and I'm so grateful to be able to have any opportunity to talk about broadband. The real challenge also exists for people who work in the private sector in various different businesses, who run their own business, but haven't been able to necessarily transition to working from home as so many professionals have, primarily because they don't have the internet at home. So in some of our communities, there have been hotspots set up. And so there are people who are sitting in their cars for a full work day, telecommuting from the parking lot of a Food Lion because they do not have internet connectivity at home. And so this is such a major and important infrastructure issue that mattered significantly before COVID and was a major point of interest for me before COVID, but certainly since COVID, this investment in infrastructure is going to be so vitally important moving forward as we rebuild and take another look at what our economy is. And I just want to say thank you to the Chamber for having us. Certainly as members of Congress, I want to acknowledge the tragic events of the 6th, and certainly the passing and the murder of Officer Sicknick and the unfortunate death of Officer Liebengood, people who were committed to keeping folks like John and me and every advocate or citizen who ever walked through the halls of Congress or came to our office to lobby us, committed to keeping us all safe. So again, thank you so much.
And thank you for taking time to recognize them. Representative Keko, I want to turn to you. You're also deeply in touch with your district. What are you seeing? Some of the same issues, different challenges? What does it look like there in New York?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I just want to echo some sentiments of what my colleague and good friend Abigail was talking about with respect to the Capitol Hill Police. They underwent a very serious trauma. There's a lot of concern for them. So to the extent that the chamber or individuals within the chamber can express their support and appreciation to them, it would be greatly appreciated. About 20 minutes ago, I met a mother of one of the officers who was assaulted, severely assaulted. He happened to be an old intern of mine, and I met her at my house. I'm bringing down a care package for him from Syracuse today. So it's real and it's very serious, and it's a dark day in our history, but we need to band together as a country. With respect to what's going on in my district, I want to basically adopt what my colleague said. We're going through the same things here. Restaurants are in very big trouble. My sister has a restaurant that's been in existence for 22 years, an icon of the community, and they're hanging on by their fingernails, and it's not clear they're going to make it. And so many others are in the same boat. What's frustrating here is that only 1.4% of the contact tracing that's been conducted can be traced back to restaurants and bars. Yet the governor has pretty much shut them down completely for large swaths of New York State, which is a very big concern. So moving forward, I hope we can get more relief to them. The PPP that we're using in this package is going to help them, but they're going to need a lot more going forward. And I agree with what you were saying earlier too, Neela, about what we need to do moving forward with respect to small businesses. Many of them have been devastated by this. I can't tell you how many businesses that I've heard from that have sacrificed all their funds. People have drawn on their 401k or drained their 401k just to keep their employees with a paycheck, which is unbelievable American spirit on their part. So we do have to do much more going forward. And what Abigail and I have been able to do with our working together and things such as a problem solvers caucus is really kind of bridge the gap between the obvious divide of the Democratic and Republican parties. We get together every week. There's 25 Republicans and 25 Democrats. We call ourselves the problem solvers, and we work on these issues. And I dare say that were it not for what we put out, there would not have been that $900 billion package. So everything Abigail said about the concerns in her community are concerns of mine. The only thing I'd add to that is that the state and local governments, especially local governments in New York State, are really in a very big bind. They relied so much on tax revenue, sales tax revenue in particular, to fund their governments. And they've done nothing other than do what CDC has told them to do and shut down their economies and shut down business to stop the spread of COVID. Well, in the process, they've gutted their finances. No one's talking about helping them fill pre-existing budget gaps, but we do need to do that piece of the puzzle, which try and get these local governments and state governments to some extent back to a point where they can be operational again financially.
Well, Congressman, I will say it. You may have dared to say it. I will say it. There would not have been a pandemic relief package but for the efforts of you and your colleagues in the Problem Solvers Caucus. We only have a couple minutes left, and all three of you have actually touched on this, but I want to put it in the words of one of our partners. Tim Damon of the Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce in Michigan just sent this question to all of you. What can Congress do to provide further recovery support to small businesses, particularly those in the most economically distressed sectors? All of you touched upon this, but I'm going to maybe start with Congresswoman Spanberger. We'll go to Keko, and Neela, give you the last word. Give us one thing that you'd like to see in the year 2021. Congresswoman?
Well, so what I would like to see is a continued acknowledgement that even though the stock market might be in a better or more stable place, that is not fully reflective of all elements of the larger economy, but specifically the local economy, the small businesses that do drive so much, that employ so many people across the nation. So what I would like to see kind of as a foundational building block is a more expanded conversation, which my colleague John and I, and certainly members of the chamber across the country have been focused on, which is what's happening on the ground. It, I think, will be very, many people want to move past the virus and move beyond COVID, particularly now that we've started deploying vaccines, but it is going to be incredibly important that we make foundational investments in rebuilding. And so I am a strong supporter of investments in infrastructure projects, putting people back to work, recognizing that there's been failing elements of our nation's infrastructure for years and decades at this point. And that is a place for us to invest in our own country, also putting people back to work. And then notably, broadband as a larger element of that is incredibly important to the economic recovery and the ability to grow out of this hole for smaller communities and more rural communities like the one that I represent. And I also would note that we also need to have a focus while we're still in recovery mode and focused on the economy. We have to make sure that we can never see this sort of pandemic like this occurring in our country, but also more importantly, that we never see such a faulty response, as I would characterize it, where we failed time and time again to see how significant the threat really was and respond in the way that we needed to. John Katko and I actually co-sponsored introduced a bill together called the Advance Act, which would strengthen our government's ability to respond to future public health crises and natural disasters by prioritizing the coordination of information. And so, as an element of our recovery and our ability to restore stability to the larger economy, part of that has to be making sure that we never find ourselves in this scale of a economic challenge of the level of unemployment that we've seen. And we do that by planning. So thank you again for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. John, I look forward to seeing you on Capitol Hill. And again, thank you to the Chamber and for all of your members for having us.
Well, thank you. Representative Katko, one thing you'd like to see this year?
Sure. I mean, there's several things, but with respect to small businesses in particular, I think we need to turbocharge the vaccination process. And we're achieving that step to some extent with the funding in the latest relief package, but we need to get everyone vaccinated as quickly as humanly possible. That will give people the confidence to go back and support businesses. They'll feel comfortable going out in the communities and what have you. I think we also need to continue to push the concepts that have been laid in the Paycheck Protection Program to aid small businesses, especially in underserved and economically distressed areas. The also thing we need to do is to incentivize our manufacturers, small business manufacturers and what have you, to come back home. This COVID relief crisis laid bare our vulnerabilities by having too much of our manufacturing base and business base overseas in countries like China, where we are vulnerable. So more that we can bring back home, the more that we can incentivize to bring them back home is something I think is important as well. And I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague Abigail and point out to all of you, there's lots of Congress to get together and get along. You hear about the ones that get on the news and their respective news outlets and blow smoke, but we're the ones that are in the trenches every day slugging it out for you all. And we understand that we're not always right on every single issue. We understand that we need to compromise, just like you do in the business world. And we're going to continue to do that going forward. We're going to get past this crisis and the COVID crisis, and we're going to get back to helping the American economy get back on its feet. But we need the great work and great interaction that we have with the Chamber. And I appreciate very much the Chamber's position on things. You're really kind of a mirror image of what we, Abigail and myself and others like us in Congress, want to see out of the business community and out of the political community. And I very much appreciate that. So thank you for having me, and thank you for what you're doing, all of you, and stay strong. We're going to get through this.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Neela, we have about 30 seconds for a last word before we move to our next program.
Well, Thanks again for that opportunity. Look, I agree wholeheartedly, especially with the comments on infrastructure spending. Broadband for our rural and our urban communities is critical going forward, not just for small businesses, but a lot of students who are remote from the pandemic. I would add the rental moratorium, which ends in January. For rentees and for landlords, this is critical. It affects small businesses as well, who are both paying rent, paying mortgages, and also on the other side as landlords. Congress could address that to stop. It could be a tidal wave of defaults and some really big problems going forward for our small businesses. And lastly, the second thing I would like to see is that Representative Spanberger and Katko continue this conversation with their colleagues. Such great solutions. We're looking to you, Congress, to help us bridge this gap and survive this downturn as a small business community. So I'm really optimistic from what I've heard today.
Well, thanks to the three of you for joining us today. We could have gone on for hours, I think,
Yes.
but I'm going to join Neil and say we need more of these type of conversations. The events of the past week have really highlighted the need for principled leaders who are committed to democracy and the democratic norms, such as our two members of Congress who joined us today. When our democratic institutions, when norms, when the citadel of democracy is attacked, it requires a response not just from our elected leaders, but also from the business community. We have an important role to play in reinforcing the rule of law and those democratic norms and institutions. And that's why we're pleased today to announce a couple of new initiatives on the part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Neela almost nearly stole the show there by preluding something that we really hope to have happen in the coming months. In fact, we're going to make happen. And we called our new Common Grounds virtual event series. What we're going to do is bring together two members of Congress, a Republican and a Democrat, around an issue that our nation is facing, and ask them to talk through, just as Representative Spanberger and Representative Katko did, of how both parties can come together and address these challenges. If you enjoyed this last discussion as much as I did, I hope you will turn in to our new Common Ground series and encourage your own member of Congress to join and to take part and to make the bipartisan conversations that we all need to have to solve our nation's problems a reality. We also understand that the core of in government and business and engagement is the concept of civics. There are some frightening statistics out there. Only 2 in 5 Americans, according to a recent survey, can name the 3 branches of government. And most 8th graders lack even a basic proficiency in civics. This is an American issue. This is an issue for the business community. And it's one that our colleagues at the U.S. Chamber Foundation have been working on for a number of years to understand the depth of the problem and what we might do to address it. So this year, they're taking their efforts beyond just studying it to actually combating the problem. They're launching a new Center for Civics, Democracy, and Capitalism. It's going to elevate civics as a critical national issue, working with federal, state, and local officials and the private sector to improve the state of civics education, the understanding of our democratic institutions, and free market capitalism. These 2 initiatives will be joined by others throughout the year as we figure out what more the business community can do in this critical moment. To help us understand the role of the business community, I'm pleased to welcome to lead off our next segment, Greg Lebedev, the chairman of the Chamber's affiliate organization, the Center for International Private Enterprise, or CIPE. Since 1983, CIPE has worked around the globe to strengthen democracy. Now we need to take some of the lessons that they've deployed around the world right here at home. And to help us understand those lessons, there's no one better than my good friend, Greg. Greg?
Neil, thanks very much and good afternoon. Over the past year, our country has been challenged in ways that few could have planned for or even imagined. We know the story because we're living it. A relentless virus, a battered economy, rancorous politics, and maybe more troubling, a divided America. But there are bright spots and there will be more. It was the business community that rallied to develop and deliver a range of pandemic solutions at record speed. And it is the business community, big and small, that's doing everything possible to keep themselves alive and keep our economy afloat. And it's the business community that can now play an important part in helping the country reconnect with its democratic values. Of course, none of this is easy. Not just the disheartening spectacle of this past week, but over the past several years, there's been a steady decline in the public's trust of our institutions, our elected governments, the courts, media, churches, and yes, even business. So the places that are intended to protect and nurture the various elements of our democracy are themselves at risk. Our need to strengthen our democracy is also impeded by the fact that too many Americans don't really know what democracy means, as Neil just suggested. They know we have one, but have little grasp of its many ingredients, such as rule of law, equity, accountable governance, public safety, and much more. And our elected officials occasionally compound the problem by carelessly using the word as a rhetorical dart rather than a meaningful concept. So we have a lot to do, and I applaud the U.S. Chamber for convening today's panel to explore how the business community, which represents almost every aspect of American life, how the business community can begin to identify what needs to be done throughout the country to rediscover American democracy. We have with us today two individuals who bring an acute appreciation of the relationship between business and the free market democracy. Marlene Colucci is the Executive Director of the Business Council, the nearly 90-year-old organization whose CEO-only membership meets to discuss issues affecting the economy and the government. Marlene has served in the White House and the Labor Department and sits on the board of a public company as well as that of the National Endowment for Democracy. And Andrew Wilson is the Executive Director of the Center for International Private Enterprise, one of the core institutes of the NED. Andrew leads a global NGO whose mission is to draw upon America's free enterprise experience to assist countries that are struggling to institutionalize democratic norms. My first question is for Andrew, and let's get right to the point. What should business be concerned about? Why should business be concerned about the state of democracy?
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to the Chamber's audience. CIPE was established 37 years ago, along with the National Endowment for Democracy, in order to promote and support our friends who believe in democratic ideals around the world, and in particular within the business community. And when we did so, the idea was that we weren't going to go out with a particular model of American democracy to try and spread it abroad, but that what we were going to look at is, what are the home truths of democracy that are important? What spreads across societies? And I think if we're going to share anything today, it's not necessarily what CIPE has learned around the world, but really trying to reinforce what we know about democracy in general and what's important about democracy. I think the first important lesson is I think there's certain home truths about democracy. What are the touchstones of a democratic society? It's respect for the four freedoms, respect for property rights. It's the rule of law, not the rule by laws. I'm reminded of a South American dictator who once said, for my friends, everything, and for my enemies, the law. We want to make sure that the rule of law is consistent and well applied. It's that political power also respects the will of the people and makes sure that their wishes are conveyed into the governance of a country. And finally, it's also the need for mechanisms to ensure the peaceful transfer of power within society. But most importantly, in the lessons that we try to teach people, is that business needs democracy and democracy needs business. Why does business need democracy? Well, we know from research around the world that business does better in a democracy. And why is that? Well, democracies offer a stable business environment in which we can conduct our business. It gives business the best possible environment of freedom to compete and innovate. And it provides accountable and transparent government and governance. And we might get to that a little bit later. And finally, democracies offer the opportunity for partnership, not only with policymakers, but with civil society and other elements of our community that helps us address both the economic and social challenges that our societies face. But just as importantly, I think democracy needs business. And the question is why? And we've come across this, I think, in the 1990s when we were doing our work abroad, and we saw what was happening in Eastern Europe as we saw backsliding and trouble in democracies as they tried to make the transition. But the important thing about democracy is that it must deliver. You know, democracy is a lot of work. It requires citizens to do things. It requires people not only to vote and to do jury duty and to pay their taxes, but it also means they need to participate in their communities and their civil society, and they have to transmit their values to others. It's hard work. And for people to undertake the hard work of democracy, they need to see its benefits. And for most of us, benefits means a better life. It means a job. It means prosperity. And that's important if we're going to see democracy sustain itself. When it can't provide, that's when we start seeing problems. The second reason why democracy needs business is that democracy is about leadership, and about not just political leadership, but leadership from across the board. And business is part of that leadership equation. It goes there with the political parties, with civil society, with media, and with labor. So we really do need to make sure that business plays its voice of leadership within a democratic society to make sure that we have a balanced collection of views and priorities when we're trying to make policies. So Greg, back to you.
Andrew, you drew a very good picture of the interdependence of business and democracy. So Marlene, since the private sector has such a huge stake in a healthy democratic society, what are the ways that business can contribute to democracy?
Well, thank you, Greg, and thanks, Andrew, and thanks to the Chamber. I think that as I think about this, I think Andrew really set it out very well in terms of the symbiotic relationship between business and democracy. So how can business contribute? Well, I think business can provide leadership. Business is a powerful platform. It can impact a wider audience, and it can provide calm and consistency during a crisis. I know just this week it was really heartening to see so many businesses and business leaders come together and call for an end of violence, support for the peaceful transition of government, and to urge people to come together. And when I think about this symbiotic relationship and the functioning of government, how important that is to democracy, I think about an example from my own experience, which was seeing the business community collaborate with government to make sure that it functions and delivers to its citizens. For example, I think, Greg, you alluded to this in your opening remarks, the COVID crisis. When we started experiencing this crisis, we had weekly calls with CEOs from around the globe, really talking about how do we share best practices and how do we keep our workers safe. And part and parcel of that, we had a call with Governor Hogan, who was then the head of the National Governors Association, and several governors, where business leaders got together with these governors and shared with them their best practices on how they found, what worked and what didn't when it came to keeping their employees safe, but also sharing with them what's the responsibility of government? What does government need to do to make things work? For example, making sure that you have transportation that's safe so people can continue to go to their essential jobs, making sure that they have schools that function so that people can work from home, that their employees can continue to work while their children are being educated. So all those things are government functions, but you can see that they really need to, I think, work together. I feel like, we also saw businesses really stand up and work with a lot of government entities and offer their teams, offer advice. They also, turned their manufacturing capabilities to make PPE and ventilators. I mean, it was really an extraordinary collaboration between business and government. But ultimately, for democracy to function, you have to have that kind of coordination. I think, I have one more example, just briefly. I know we don't have a lot of time, but what I saw, what I witnessed when we had issues of racial inequality. A lot of the CEOs got together. We had very intense calls about what are the best practices and how do we figure out how to get through this crisis? And then also,
individual CEOs and companies having discussions with their employees, very open and honest discussions about how can we make sure that everyone feels they're a part and a contributing part of society, and that they can be part of the economic success of society. It's so important that I think business play a good role and show that it's a purpose for good. So I think these are two examples. And in some cases, you know, with that, for example, sometimes business it takes up the mantle and actually creates something. So for example, with racial inequality, we had Ken Frazier from Merck put together a coalition called the 110 Coalition, which basically helps to provide Black Americans an opportunity to get jobs in corporate America by partnering with civil society and nonprofits to make sure that they have the right preparation, the right education. I think these are all good examples of how business can really function with government and promote democracy at the same time.
Those are good examples, Marlene. And there, I think, hopefully, there will be no shortage of individuals and institutions that want to help. But Andrew, mindful of Marlene's good examples and the fact that you deal with business executives all over the world, give me a quick snapshot of what you've seen and believe to be examples of good business leadership.
Well, I think at a time like this too, we really need to look at business leadership from two perspectives. You know, we recognizing that the challenge that we have right now in the country is in the terms of something of a crisis, a political crisis. But you know, leadership needs to emerge, I think, at both short-term and long-term levels. And when we get into situations where leadership is required from the private sector in an urgent way, I think it's very important for the private sector to first and foremost make its interests and values clear in whatever situation it's facing. The one we're facing with right now is the importance of our institutions and of our democracy. But you know, I think transparency in terms of why you're coming to this problem and why you want to deal with this problem are important. And they're an important part of leadership. When people see the corporate community, when people see small and medium businesses within their own communities stand up and say, I want to change something. This isn't right, or this is good and we need to be doing more of it. It's very important for people to see that leadership by example from the private sector. And I think it's also important that we think of in terms of national work and local work. It's not just the big corporations in the country that need to exercise leadership. They play a vital role. They play a top line role in our country. But more and more, we also need to look to our companies and our firms at the local level, our small and medium businesses, because they have an important contribution to make within their communities. In the longer term, when we talk about leadership and changing environments, if you will, and trying to change the way societies operate, I think what business organizations like the Chamber can do, and the Chamber's membership can do in terms of business leadership, as well as individual companies, is to promote dialogue over division. And I think the Chamber's move to a new scorecarding system, for example, is an important example of how that's done. When the Chamber announced that it was going to rate members of Congress based on their ability to extend their hand over the aisle and work with people over the aisle, that's an important signal to both the policymakers, but to the community. But we also need to look at how we address national challenges with other members of civil society to address the things that cause people to question instability, that cause people to question democratic institutions and get at the stability of our own society. That's being willing to talk about economic opportunity. It's being willing to talk about social opportunity, whether that's immigration reform or education. It's addressing, as Marlene said, is addressing the issues of racial diversity and inequality. But it's also things like the new Chamber Foundation is going to do in supporting civics and education and democracy. Lastly, business needs to lead by helping build trust in societies. And we know that is done by building confidence in institutions, and it comes from experience.
2 minutes.
And we have to help people feel the positive outcomes of participating in a democracy. And we need people to feel empowered about their participation in democracy. And to that end, businesses can do a better job of examining and communicating why it's important to have a strong private sector and that linkage with democracy and institutions and why they are legitimately interested in democracy. I think Openly showing leadership is really important. And I salute the Chamber for the work it's been doing in that regard. But leadership in supporting our institutions and working with people across the board to make sure that support for our institutions is there. And finally, a willingness to work across society again to help solve our problems. If we do those things, if we show leadership, I think people will slowly come back and regain the trust in institutions because they'll see the solutions of cooperation being fruitful in their own lives.
Thank you, Andrew. We're coming to the end of our session. We had one more quick question from Christine Ross, the president of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, and I'll ask Marlene to give us a very crisp answer to this one. In difficult times like these, what can state and local chambers and local businesses do to support our democracy at the community level?
Thank you, Greg. I think that's a great question. And I think, probably Christine and others that are at the local level know even better than we, here at the national level. I think that, while federal government, big business and federal government can, provide that relationship, I think at the local level, it's really where the rubber meets the road and where things can actually happen. I just can think of a good example since we have not a lot of time. When I was in the city of Detroit, we had a meeting there, and it was an amazing example to see a city that had really gotten all of these advocates together. So business, you had Quicken Loans, you had JP Morgan, you had government, Mayor Mike Dugan, I'm sure some of you are from Detroit out there and should be very proud. You had civil society, you had nonprofits, you had everybody working together to say, we want to change the way in which this city is going to operate. And if we're going to attract business and we're going to create economic opportunity, then we've got to have safe streets. They've got to be well lit. We've got to have participation. And it wasn't easy, but there was just a tremendous amount of cooperation and collaboration. And I think at the local level is a great example of what can be done when business and government partner to a better end and to make sure society and citizens know that they're all a part of this democracy and that it's going to benefit all of them.
You're absolutely right. Marlene and Andrew, thank you very much. With the Chamber, you have helped start a national conversation about a topic that can be uncomfortable, sometimes arcane, but is absolutely essential. This conversation must continue, and the business community is perfectly positioned to join with others to help all of us calm our passions, restore, and if necessary, relearn our democratic norms, and begin to regain the lost trust which too many have experienced. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you again for joining us for the 2021 State of American Business. I'm Suzanne Clark, President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. As Tom said, the past year has been defined by the resilience of the American business community. Throughout the pandemic, we've seen how businesses respond in times of crisis. They adapt, innovate, and harness progress and change for good. But this should come as no surprise. Throughout history, that same resilience has allowed us to drive progress, decade after decade, century after century. It's why businesses in America are responsible for more wealth, more jobs, and more opportunity than were ever before created in human history. That has not happened in spite of historic challenges. It's happened because of historic challenges. It's happened because the drive, the fervor, the innovation, and the hard work of American workers and businesses inspires us to think about the world not as it is, but as it could be. In light of the events of the past week, we know business leadership is needed now more than ever to unite our country and rally our nation around a broad economic recovery. It's sometimes said that change happens slowly and then all at once. The past 10 months have undoubtedly proven that true, and this moment of dramatic acceleration will launch us into the next period of American innovation. This afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by a distinguished panel of business leaders who are helping chart the way forward. Their organizations are committed to doing well and doing good, to driving progress in our communities and across our great country. Penny Pennington is the managing partner of Edward Jones. Dara Khosrowshahi is the CEO of Uber. And Mike Roman is the chairman and CEO of 3M. As you will hear, their organizations are helping lead our country through the pandemic and shaping what the world will look like on the other side of it. So let's get started. Dara, let's start with technology and innovation. I mean, in a lot of ways, Uber is synonymous with the gig economy and with disruption. What is this period of time telling you, making you think about innovation in the coming years?
Well, necessity is certainly the mother of innovation. And, one of the precepts of Uber was to provide an entirely flexible work opportunities for people who want to engage in the gig economy. You push a button, you can start earning, whether you want to drive or you want to deliver food or groceries, et cetera. And what this epidemic has taught us is that the kinds of flexibility that employment is going to demand going forward, and the kind of flexibility that employers can offer their team members is really going to go up a notch, right? The gig type of work, I get to work when I want to. I get to work essentially based on what my needs are or where I want to. That was an entirely new form of work, and we built a great business out of it. But many elements of what workers love about gig work, which is the flexibility, being able to work on their own terms, that demand for flexibility and that ability for employers to provide that flexibility for their team members has gone to a different level. And I do think the very nature of work going forward is going to change from where we were previously.
It's interesting, Mike. I think 3M has long been synonymous with innovation. And you've talked a lot about how this pandemic has changed how you've thought about your external partners and kind of using external partners when you used to internalize more. Do you see that change or others continuing when we get to the other side?
There's been a number of high impact dynamics in the middle of the pandemic that have impacted our innovation, and partnering is one of them. Just a big step up in the amount of partnering that we're doing. I would say one of the changes that's driving that and other dynamics is the pressure of fixed deadlines. We are under pressure in the pandemic to deliver more quickly. Our innovation has to meet the needs of fighting the pandemic, and it's needed now. And so that fixed deadline pressure is driving our innovation changes. So the remote work, our innovation model is historically been in person with customers, in person with other 3Mers, partners as well. And to meet those fixed deadlines and to deliver on the promise of our innovation, partnering has been a big step up. So we've ramped up dramatically the numbers of partners. The impact from the partnering includes public-private partnerships. We've partnered with the Department of Defense to ramp up production of N95 respirators. We've partnered with FEMA to deliver more of our global production to people in the United States, to frontline healthcare workers. We've partnered with other companies, other private partnerships, if you will, with Ford and Cummins to increase our outputs, to innovate new solutions. It's been incredible. It's been a big outreach from other companies and company to company, and it's leading to incredible steps forward in innovation. And I will continue to expand partnership. I think it's something that it's one of those dynamics that is not going to change. It's going to be part of the new or next normal as we move ahead. It's changing our innovation in our model and expanding it for good.
That's so interesting. As we talk to government leaders, we're hearing the same thing about unprecedented partnerships and the importance of the private sector partnerships. We're hearing it from both sides. It's been wonderful. And maybe a silver lining of some sorts. And Penny, bringing you into this conversation, in a lot of ways, COVID-19, as both the other panelists said, has accelerated innovation in a different way. And certainly at Edward Jones, if I have this right, you've made a $500 million investment in digital technology. So how are you prioritizing those investments, and what does it tell you about the acceleration of innovation in this time?
Well, one of the things that is accelerating that innovation is the speed at which consumers are experiencing new experiences at the hands of people like Dara and Mike and 3M and Uber, right? We're all testing and learning and experimenting based on a quick feedback from consumers. So, for example, we learned very early in March and April during what I've called this triple pandemic that our clients, our investors, you'd think the market is volatile, so they want to talk about their portfolio and their investments, right? Well, yes, they do. But they wanted to talk about three things before they talked about that. They wanted to talk about their health, their family, and their purpose in the world. I mean, really weighty kinds of things. But they were also experiencing at that moment immediate, the need for immediate information and perspective. And so what we began to test and learn and experiment with were all kinds of resources available to them and our financial advisors, our branch teams, to help our clients around those four aspects of their lives. So we put up all kinds of dynamic resources, calculators, information. It was changing day by day. We were getting immediate feedback from clients, investors, about what it was they were looking for. And so that mother of all innovation that Dara was talking about, the speed of that has been a silver lining. It's been pressure, but it's also been a silver lining because consumers, investors, and companies have been talking to each other in real time in a more dynamic way. I think that it's really spurred on some things that might have taken a little bit longer to innovate, to invent, and to recognize that we're not going to get it perfect, but in fact, 80% is pretty good, and it's going to change so quickly. Let's get it 80% right, and test and learn from it, and innovate against that.
You know, it's interesting, Penny, that you talk about kind of the experience that people are having beyond just thinking about their own investments, but also how they're experiencing life in this super complex time. And it makes me wonder, Mike, when you think about your workforce, you know, here they've continued to work, they've come to work, they've been essential workers, they've been producing PPE, really important contributions to the country right now. What does that responsibility mean to you, to the executives at 3M, and how do you think it changes how you think about your work and your mission going forward?
Well, I would say attracting people to 3M, top talent, is critical. Nothing about applying science to solve customer problems works if you don't have top talent and people that can deliver that. And I would say one thing that was true before the pandemic and is even more clear during the pandemic, people are looking to join purpose-driven companies. And our purpose as a company has been front and center in the pandemic, applying science to improve lives, fight the pandemic from every angle, and in many ways, help protect our employees while we're doing it. And so I think that's really shined for us, and it's made our people proud. I think it's something that we can leverage as we move ahead as well. Our people are also getting used to the flexibility in how they work. And this is going to be an important part of how we change as a company and have changed in the middle of the pandemic. There's other aspects of people and culture that we focus on. This is one of our strategic priorities that we think about as a company. How do we continue to advance our culture? How do we make sure we're providing the environment, the culture, and the development for our people so they can be at their very best? So all of that, another area that you're accelerating expectations for sure in the middle of the pandemic.
I think that's a perfect segue for me to be able to ask Dara this question, which is, so you took a really unprecedented step at the beginning of this pandemic and said, maybe customers shouldn't use your service right now. And then you went further and said, no mask, no ride. And then you went further and said, how about millions, tens of millions of free rides for people who really need them, or free meal delivery? And so, you know, we've been having a lot of conversations before the pandemic about the role of business in society. What made Uber step up? How did you make those decisions? And how does that speak to what you feel about the role of business in society?
Well, I think that any business has to understand its role in society and understand that they're bigger just than a P&L. And for Uber, you know, we do operate a vital service in terms of transportation from point A to B in any city, and providing earnings opportunities during a historic period when unemployment is incredibly high. We just had a report that was unfortunately negative in terms of unemployment. So providing earners the opportunities to earn on their terms is incredibly important. So for us, we've always been a very mission-oriented company. But I will tell you that when I had the meeting with my marketing team, who came to pitch me on an idea, hey, we've got a great campaign that is going to encourage people to stay home and not use Uber. That was a little bit of a surprise. But, the culture of the company is of innovation and coming up with fresh ideas. And we felt as a company that we needed to take a step forward, and we needed to say it and mean it, that this is a time when you should optimize, not as an individual, or you should not optimize as a company, but it's a time for you to optimize for society. And it was not a time when, we wanted to make sure if you want to use our service, please make sure you need to use our service. We made sure that for drivers who, a lot of our drivers drive to make a living and they need the money. If they were in a situation where they were feeling sick or a loved one was feeling sick, we would pay them essentially not to drive. And we very quickly pivoted to distributing $50 million worth of safety equipment to our drivers, masks, sanitizers, et cetera. So there are times when you step up as individuals, you step up as companies. This was a time that it was very clear to us that it was time for Uber to think about our role in society, our role in cities, and our responsibility to the greater community.
That's a great answer. And it reminds me of the work I know all three of your companies do and how you feel about doing well and doing good. And Penny, let me turn to you about, we know this pandemic has been particularly hard on certain segments of society. Dara just referred to a few. We know working parents has certainly been hard hit with the closure of schools and childcare centers. And you've done some unique things, I think, to support working parents there. And I'm curious, if you think there's anything to be learned in those strategies as we come out to the other side and continue to support working parents in the workplace in the future.
Well, Dara and Mike have testified to it in other ways in our conversation so far, that taking care of our associates has been at the center of what we've been up to, staying connected to our clients, our colleagues, and our communities, and recognizing that their well-being needed to be at the center during a time that they have been the most anxious that I would expect they may ever be in their lives. And so what we've seen from our colleagues, our working parents, the anxiety that's come as schools have opened and closed again, as they've been caregivers for their children and their parents. And the very unexpected things that have happened in our communities, community by community, over the past several months. So we took it from the very beginning as an important charge to, as a private company, as a private partnership. We've always had the opportunity, perhaps differently than a public company, but always had the opportunity to be able to think very long term. We learned in 2008, 2009, the value of not laying off any of our colleagues. And so we put that front and center with our associates this time as well. We did institute a hiring freeze, a wage and promotion freeze in April, that in September we lifted, and we lifted it retroactively because we found that we could. So the devotion that we have as an Edward Jones family has been a real important part of then enabling people to lessen their anxiety so that they can take care of our clients who are also anxious, who are going through the same sorts of anxiety-ridden experiences in their lives. And it's our job, because we help them with their long-term goals, their hopes, and their dreams. It's our job to lessen their anxiety, to keep them focused on the long term. And that I'll go back to innovation then. That was one reason that we knew we needed to help them with their questions about family, health, purpose, and their finances, to put all of that in perspective so that they could keep their eye focused on the short-term things that they needed to do, but also the long-term. So the policies that we instituted in terms of our our flexibility, our sick leave policy, extra days for people to be away from work if they needed to, mental health days, urging team leaders to urge their teams just to take the time that they needed, and to stay together via technology, to be as intimate as we could be through after hours, happy hours by Zoom, the kinds of things that help the team stay together and helped us stay together with our clients.
So let me turn to Mike while we're talking about workforce. I mean, 3M has made a significant commitment, $50 million over the next 5 years to address racial opportunity gaps in workforce development. Can you talk a little bit about that initiative?
Yeah, it started and really had a launch with the killing of George Floyd here in Minnesota. This hit our people hard. It was a call to action for us. It was a call to step up our leadership, companies and company leaders alike, and for us to demand more and be part of solutions that drive more progress. And we had to take a step to first listen and understand where we could make a difference, where we could leverage 3M's strengths to really act in a way that would make a difference. And then we committed to be part of the solution. We engaged our people, our employee resource networks, our leadership across the company, community leaders. We really spent a lot of time engaging potential partners and ultimately coalition partners that we formed a plan with. And we have a long history of investing in communities, but this was about doing more. And the $50 million investment, this is to support what we're doing. We have 2 big efforts that are underway in partnership here. And we made the decision to focus on the Twin Cities to really make a difference here. And we formed the partnerships here. We are investing here. We're putting our time in. And the focus is on racial justice for economic development, the future of work. And how do we leverage 3M's STEM education focus and capabilities and our manufacturing? We are a manufacturer that produces products close to customers. And so we have factories in 29 states in the United States. We have an opportunity to be part of economic development, from STEM education to job opportunities. And so we are working with partners to leverage those strengths from 3M, step into that. And at the same time, we are working to drive greater progress in diversity and inclusion, starting with 3M, but also participating in the community with those partners. So it's driving a lot of energy. Our people are really see this as a place that we can make a difference. We've invested in some new leaders that are going to help us step forward in the right way and really manage this like a business does, setting goals, laying out program plans, holding ourselves accountable to milestones and delivering. And we really think that this is an opportunity for us to really make a difference.
This has been a hard time for our country, a complicated time for people in all kinds of different ways. And yet, as business leaders, we tend to be optimistic. I think we have to be optimistic. So tell me, Dara, I'm going to start with you. And what makes you optimistic about the future?
You know, I think a lot of us have experienced very difficult times, especially with the transition of our president or president-elect. And I know that was a really tough time for everybody. But like you said, CEOs need to be optimists. And what I keep telling people to keep in mind is that our system and our government in the end operated as it should have. Our leaders and representatives came back, they met, they stood up, and they stood up not as Democrats or Republicans, but as one nation together, and they did the right thing. So while these times have been very difficult, I take a lot of comfort with our leaders who came together profoundly to move us forward.
Penny?
What makes me so hopeful is I think the power of humanity and human kindness has found a new groove this past year. The value that we see in our families, our communities, human connection, we got reminded of how powerful that was. And sitting alongside of that is how powerful it is when we listen to each other. As employers, we had to listen to our colleagues. We got to listen to our colleagues in ways that maybe we had taken for granted in the past. Same for our clients, our investors and consumers. So I think the power of the human connection and listening to one another about what's meaningful to each other is going to help us bridge some gaps in the future.
The last word to you, Mike.
And one of the things I've been very encouraged about in the middle of the pandemic is the increased public trust in science. And it's something we measure. We have a state of science survey we do across 14 countries, and we've seen it step up dramatically through the pandemic. And I think everybody's seen the power of science to help us take on these incredible challenges. For us, it's around PPE, but more importantly, vaccines to really fight the pandemic. And I'm really encouraged by the public's trust. I'm encouraged and optimistic about the power of science to make a difference, to solve these big challenges. And we're committed to be part of that, and we'll continue to lead with our innovation.
I think you're all three right? It's adults doing their jobs, it's kindness and listening, and it's trust. And I do think that businesses and business leaders have a really large role to play in the economic recovery and in the trust recovery. And so if we can find our kindness and be adults doing our jobs, I think, the business sector and science will lead us out of this. So I'm optimistic because of leaders like you, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Suzanne. Stay safe.
So it's not unusual for historians, no matter where they come from, to call the 20th century the American century. It speaks to America's political, economic, and cultural dominance throughout the 1900s. And of course, the engine that powered the American century was American business. American business encouraged, fought for, supported, and spurred on by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Now, some may look at the events of the past year or the past week and wonder if that's changed, if that time is over. But we're not buying it. We believe the 21st century is also the next American century, that we'll see the moral arc of the universe continue to bend toward justice, toward progress, toward equality, toward a better environment, toward innovation, and toward good governance. That's what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce believes. And that's what the business atmosphere we're working to create with big business, small companies, and startups, with Democrats and Republicans, for all Americans, for the betterment of all of us, for today, for tomorrow, and for the next American century. Thank you all for joining the 2021 State of American Business. We hope you'll stay with us for the Policy Power Hours at 12 p.m. Eastern Time throughout the rest of the week. If you haven't already registered, you can at uschamber.com. I look forward to seeing you all again very soon.